does, but it's easier when I can read it and see what's written out. Rebecca Zung is one of the top 1% of attorneys in the nation, having been recognized by the U.S. News, one of the best lawyers in America. She's also a globally recognized narcissist negotiation expert and the creator of the Slay negotiation method. She's the author of the upcoming book, Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win, which I know will be talked about a little bit more on this webinar here, and I look forward to that. And 2 best-selling books, Negotiate Like You Matter, The Surefire Method to Step and Win, and Breaking Free, a step-by-step divorce guide for achieving emotional, physical, and spiritual freedom. So there's a little bit of a background for you guys on who Amy and Rebecca are, and we'll kind of just let them talk and take it away for us, and I'll disappear and let these guys do what they do best.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I so enjoyed my conversation with Rebecca for so many reasons. And I think chiefly because your toolbox is one that comes with a lot of efficiencies. And there is the sort of philosophical idea of some of these things that are, just sort of sit in the abstract. And what I love about your work and how you frame things is how do we drill down on the practical guide, right? Your new book, Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win. I'm so excited to read. And I think I would I'm fascinated because of your background as a lawyer. I'd love you to refresh the audience a little bit on how you came to intersect with this very specific topic of the narcissist as a lawyer and why you felt like it was important to kind of understand that dynamic in your work.
Yeah, it's interesting because I initially was saying to people when they were asking me this question that it was because I had a narcissistic business partner. But then when I sat down to write the book, I really started to realize that it's almost like this confluence of events with my whole life, because I was bullied as a kid for being Asian. And yeah. And it's interesting because I started off the book by remembering that whole experience as a kid for being bullied, and how that really influenced my whole life, and how I wanted to advocate for people who felt voiceless, and why I feel so passionate about this work now. And then I ended up, even after I became very, very successful as a lawyer, in a business partnership with a woman who turned out to be a covert narcissist. And it brought back all those feelings in me of being bullied as a child. And, how a narcissist can take a person within a matter of months and make them feel powerless, because of how they operate. It's just so incredible. Even people who feel very, very powerful in other areas of their life. And so I wanted people to realize that and know that. And at the end of my book, I do my acknowledgements, and I ended up by saying, thank you for being lessons in my life, really.
I love that trajectory so much. I mean, it's even evolved since we've had a conversation, which I think is interesting, because that part of being bullied for being Asian was not something that was foremost in your consciousness. And the fact that through this work and understanding this work and understanding, what is that dynamic, you realize, oh, wait a minute, I come from a kind of primal trauma of my own, where it really set the stage for, some of my own reactivity. It's such a testament to understand what this is really about, because of many ways that it shows up. I mean, as we've said, Jeff Hayes, who, kicked this whole series off, initially I was like, well, because I'd had my own kind of coming out of a dynamic with a narcissist. And I was like, well, how do you define a narcissist, Jeff? And he said, well, apparently the ex-partner of everybody I know.
Exactly.
And I was like, well, we should probably drill down on a little bit more specifically about what this is and what this isn't, you know? And so much of it was understanding not all a-holes are narcissists and not all narcissists are a-holes, right? There are a lot of things to understand about what this really is all about and how these things can shapeshift throughout your life. You know, you might think, okay, rid myself of narcissists as my, you know, romantic partner. But what you didn't realize is that you just bait and switch for the narcissist as your boss or your pastor or your, you know, the child or your parent. So how understanding that revelation about that you had a very young experience with this in your childhood,
Mm-hmm.
how has that informed what you felt like was necessary in terms of your next chapter in this book? Like what was the new revelation that you had in the pursuit of making this book that you felt like needed to be shared?
Well, I mean, there's just so many different things because, I mean, one of the things that I say so often is that narcissists don't attach themselves to you because you have so little value. They attach themselves to you because you have so much. And, you know, people, you know, they devalue you so much that you feel so less than by the time you're, and so, you know, empty, such a shell of yourself by the time you're done that you don't feel that way anymore. But you think about it. I mean, what do you think they're still around for? You know, I mean, they don't want the clearance rack item. I mean, they want something that's of value, right? And that's why they glommed onto you in the first place. It's a spider-fly relationship, right? You know, I mean, they need to have that control. And so that's why they're there, for that supply, for that value. But, you know, the thing is, they do look for people who have that unhealed trauma, and you know, because it's that person who thinks they can save them, who thinks they can help, who are going to be willing to keep going, keep doing, keep trying, and not take care of themselves, who don't have defined boundaries, who aren't willing to say, I'm not doing that, you know, and that is something I've certainly learned about myself now.
You know, it's so interesting because in the course of doing the series and listening to the very many people that have different on-ramps on this discussion, you know, whatever their experience is, from people that were in cults to people that are economists to, you know, one of the things that I thought was fascinating was the discussion we had around the origin story of Narcissus, you know, the mythological tale of Narcissus. And one of the elements that's often forgot is that it's not a solo story. It's a tale of Narcissus and Echo.
Mm-hmm.
And Echo in the story, you know, who was condemned to only repeat the words of I think the last person she talked to, who loses herself in the process, you know. And so, and I was like, well, that is fantastic. That is really the key dynamic of this discussion, because understanding what your part is,
Mm-hmm.
taking back your agency and saying, I am a participant in this dynamic, and how do I how do I, sort of extinguish my consent in this dynamic, and I thought, well, this is really the work, because it's not necessarily about going to fix all of the narcissists in the world, but it might be understanding what part of it you might play.
Well, and you have to see it that way, because you're never going to fix them, right? You have to take responsibility for your own actions in it, right? And I mean, one of the biggest aha moments for me, when I went back to I call my business coach. She is my business coach, but she's also done more for me than any psychologist in a lot of ways. This person that I've worked with for like 13 years, I went back to her after I had that whole experience with my business partner. And she said to me, it's not what she says to you, it's how it lands for you.
Right.
And because basically, if somebody calls you a banana, you'd be like, well, I know I'm not a banana. So, okay, whatever. Right. So, but if somebody says something to you and there's an emotion that generates around that, then you know that it's unhealed for you. Right. So it's how you take it. And so, you have to understand that that's unhealed work that you have to do, and take back your authentic power. And that's the thing that I teach people all the time. And that's the why in my SLAY method, where I tell people, authentic power beats their fake power all day long.
Yeah.
I mean, that is their kryptonite. That is their kryptonite. They are way more afraid of you than you are of them.
Well, and that idea of like, what is it you are feeding? I had a friend of mine that was like, how do I stop attracting narcissists? And I was like, by stop eating what they feed you. I mean, you have to become sort of a boring catch. I want to throw out a question to one of the people that is watching that I think is actually quite fascinating. Gerald E asks, after watching the series, I feel like I've learned a lot about how I can avoid a narcissist, but how can I help a narcissist? Really interesting question. I have family that are very narcissistic, and I don't want to disappear out of their lives.
Mm.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I don't know that you can really help them other than to help them understand that you are no longer going to be a source of supply for them. And that will help you and help them. I mean, I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is to create boundaries. And I say step 1, don't run. Step 2, make a U-turn. Step 3, break free. Because I know it's baby steps, but boundaries.
Yeah, that was a very fascinating theme that came up, I think, pretty consistently with all of our experts, was the idea of boundaries. Because, I mean, when I was going through a particularly tough time, somebody gave me the advice with a person that I was struggling with, keep them as close as you can keep your heart open. And I thought, well, that's a really great assignment, because it allows you to remain yourself without being too defensive. But you also get to establish how close can I bring this person into my life and still remain an open-hearted person, And I think for families, because families are so deep, the family relationships are so deep. Part of, I mean, I know in my own life when I've had narcissistic tendencies, which I think all of us do, people that have allowed me to see that I was behaving in a way that wasn't in service of the big picture, right? You know, if they would remind me, hey, it's Saturday, I'm actually with my family and I'm not going to answer your call. And I'd be like, oh, wow. So I think the idea of not being the supply to the narcissist. So as a family member, you can, make it clear that you're there as a family member, but you're not there as supply, right? Is that part of it? Because trying to help a narcissist is getting ensnared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've adopted a mantra, which is defend your light with your life. So, whatever you have to do to kind of have this sort of bubble around yourself that is almost like your protective shield, that is defending your soul, defending your light. And whatever you need to do that, you have to do.
Yeah.
They cannot be allowed to suck that life from you, that life force from you anymore.
I had another piece of advice recently that I really loved, and I think it can apply to family as well, so that you don't end up being in a sort of tight-fisted stance, which is go in less outraged and more bewildered, right? And I think a certain amount of curiosity, like, will lead that person to run out of the thing that is supplying them, right? If you're like, oh, that's interesting that you think that, that's interesting you would say that. Why do you say that? What is that about? What is it? Maybe I don't understand. And because it's not, it doesn't come from a practical place, it'll actually extinguish itself a little bit. That, in my own experience, I found like that worked like a charm. But...
Yeah, I like that, and I sometimes say, like, if you ask just clarifying questions, it kind of helps too, so what you're saying is that you would prefer that I do this, or, so you're saying this, because a lot of times when you do that, it disarms them, because they're like, they don't keep up with what they're saying, because they realize the kind of insanity of what they're saying sometimes.
So what do you think right now? I mean, given since the last time we spoke, and there is a lot of conversations in this sort of public discourse about narcissists, what do you think is a common misunderstanding?
Well, I would love to talk about some of the interesting research that I came upon when I was preparing, and writing my book, because one of the things that I learned when I was writing my new book was the formation of how narcissists came to be. For one thing, it's definitely nurture and not nature, meaning that, it happens in childhood. It didn't, people aren't genetically, formed as narcissists. But one thing that I found, and this is the reason why you cannot have regular negotiations or communications with narcissists, is that it comes from trauma. And yes, it is a spectrum. And yes, we all have narcissistic traits and tendencies to a certain degree. And yes, it can actually kind of change throughout our lives. And even sometimes, if we're sick, we can be more narcissistic or whatever. But how it comes to be is when children are continuously exposed to trauma, or even adults, by the way, when we are exposed to trauma, our brains go into fight or flight mode, right? And when we go into fight or flight mode, then our brains emit hormones, chemicals, which are adrenaline and cortisol, things like that, to allow us to become stronger, be ready to run or fight. And when that happens on a regular basis, then it can actually cause damage to the brain. And for children, what happens is it causes arrested development in the limbic system part of the brain, that emotional part of the brain. And so what happens is, as they grow, the prefrontal cortex part of the brain continues to develop, but the limbic system part of the brain experiences arrested development. And so when these children continue to grow up, and they are now experiencing something that causes them, some kind of stimuli that causes them to feel like they need to go back into survival mode, whatever it is, whether we think it's rational or not, then that part of the brain becomes activated, and they immediately go into that mode again. And sometimes it's referred to as narcissistic injury or something like that. And that narcissistic rage can come flying out. And when that happens, oftentimes they don't even necessarily remember what they are doing during those periods of time. And so, their brains are literally different than other people's brains. And some people have actually said that their hypothalamus is actually smaller. And so we're talking about, brain physiology here.
Yeah, that's incredible. So do you know, I have one more question about that, and then I'm going to get to a couple more of the questions, which we love. We love getting questions from you all, so please keep them coming. But in the discussion about arrested development, right? Arrested development of the brain and the limbic system. So you have somebody that has had that experience that has sort of arrested their development. Can it grow? Can you repair it? Is there neuroscience that would support that you can fix that?
I mean, this is the, big question now, isn't it? I mean, I guess science would suggest that maybe there's neuroplasticity that could, I don't know, but these are people who don't necessarily want help, right? Just because of the nature of the type of personality disorder that it is. So, these are not the type of people who go to seek assistance, and I was just having this conversation with somebody recently who said, well, perhaps maybe psychedelics or something like that. I don't know. But, again, they would have to want to seek help. They would have to want to seek assistance. So I don't know the answer to that question. But for people who are targets or victims who are in relationships with these people, I would suggest to you, don't sit around and wait for that to happen, right? I mean, but what I'm on the rooftops saying is, hey, everybody, judges, mediators, people who are in the systems, everybody else, there's a huge reason why you can't communicate with these people and negotiate with them in the same way that you can with everybody else. You cannot have conversations and sit down across from them and wonder why they're not trying to get to a reasonable outcome, because they will literally take themselves down to take you down because they don't think like rational, reasonable people.
Well, to that end, we have a question from Tammy L. That slides into a little bit of this discussion. My ex-husband and I had 2 kids together before we got divorced, and now we share custody, so I still have to deal with him, and I find myself unable to completely escape from dealing with him. Any advice on how to work with him while keeping my kids and I safe and sane?
Yes, I do, actually. So here's what I have figured out. So what I have figured out is there's really 2 different forms of narcissistic supply, in my opinion. Most people talk about one form of narcissistic supply. I actually am going to tell you that there's really 2 different levels of narcissistic supply. And there's what I refer to as like diamond level supply, which is how they look to the world. So that's like kind of all the outside window dressing. So, and they will, that's what I call A level, tier 1, and they will protect and defend that at any cost. And so in my SLAY methodology, which is strategy, leverage, anticipate, and you have to create a strategy around that narcissistic supply. And then leverage is taking those 2 different tiers of supply. So diamond level supply, and then what I call coal level supply, which is the lesser form of supply. And so the lesser form of supply is manipulating you. What you're talking about here, you know, that you're unable to escape, that you're having trouble figuring out how to get him to stop. That's that coal level supply, that kind of jerking you around sort of situation. As long as he's getting that level of supply from you, he'll never leave you alone. And most people think, well, narcissists just want to win. What is it that they want? I'll just give it to them and then I'll be done. That's not true. That only takes into account that diamond level supply. So the leverage piece, the strategy piece, and the leverage piece that you have to come up with is, how can I build leverage such that you're going to threaten a source of supply that's actually going to be more important for the narcissist to keep than the supply that they get from manipulating you. That's what you have to do.
It's such an important understanding, because those of us that have dealt with narcissists in our lives, you know, especially those of us that have dealt with narcissists and you share children, there isn't anything more kind of vulnerable than that space, you know. And it can bring you to your knees so quickly. But I think it is, I mean, one of our other guests said it so beautifully. She said, I'm just not interesting to narcissists anymore. Right? Like, how do you make yourself incredibly boring? You know, and part of it is not taking the bait, right? In conversation with your ex-husband, to say, oh, I hear that you're frustrated about, you know, the fact that, you know, I showed up half an hour late, right? I understand that. So next time, should I show up on time? Would that fix it? Yeah, whatever it is, you know, because it's getting into getting the ensnared. That's the food, right? Like, that's the supply. That, you know, because it's not actually about solving the problem. A lot of people that I know that have been in custody debates with a narcissist, they will go to the death for these certain custody arrangements that ultimately they don't even execute upon. Right? They just want the win.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And what, you know, if you've dealt with this, is, okay, so it's about the win. It's not actually about having the kids.
Oh, I see it all the time. I just had a conversation with somebody about this, actually. Yeah.
So you might have to give them a little of the win, you know, in terms of going, okay, but what is it that I really want? I really want to make sure my kids are safe. So how do I really achieve that ultimately?
I mean, there's just, you know, creating that strategy. And, you know, sometimes especially if you are still in litigation, you know, where it's a temporary situation, you know, I'm trying to see, oh, this is an X situation, but I was going to say, if it's a temporary situation where you're not quite divorced yet, you can give them a little bit of rope to hang themselves, because even in a temporary situation, they won't take all their time. And that's when you can, keep track of it and use it against them. But, in this situation, if he's not taking all of his time, you can keep track of it and maybe file for modification or something like that. But, if he's doing things that he's not supposed to be doing, and, there's things that you can use against him, there's potentially things that you can, a way that you can put together a case to, have him feel like, he needs to leave you alone, present something, file a modification case, file something so that he feels like threatened and I always say it's ethically manipulating the manipulator. You're not going to do anything illegal. You're going to do everything that's within your rights to do, but you can't hang back. See, that's the thing. You have to be offensive, because if you hang back at all, they don't. And so what happens is, the people who go, well, but I want to resolve things. I want to resolve things amicably or whatever. The amicable one is way back here, while the narcissist is already, locked up all the good attorneys and has filed everything. And then, you're back there going, wait a minute, I thought we were going to, do things amicably. And, your head is spinning.
Well, also don't take the bait, right? Don't watch your emails, watch your text messages, because they can trigger you so completely and bring out your not best self, right?
Oh, everything you put your hand to is a potential trial exhibit. I say that all the time.
So being just very clean and simple in your correspondence. And I would say, even in the discussion about keeping your kids safe, I mean, look, there's such a spectrum, right? If we're talking about the spectrum of injury, especially to children, and if you're in an unsafe physical situation, if we're talking about economically unsafe, if there's definite boundaries being crossed, that's on one level. If you're talking about sort of some of the emotional sabotage that can happen with a child and a parent that's a narcissist, I think it's a delicate balance between affirming the child's observations so they're not gaslit, and yet also not making them feel like that's what they're made of.
Yeah, I know, because understanding that they are half that person.
And so if the language is really, I think it's to be done with a lot of care, and perhaps to be saying to those children, here's the good news. You guys lucked out. You got the best of your dad and me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the yucky bits, you don't have to worry about, because you didn't get those bits.
Yeah.
But there is,
advice.
there is that part, because they don't want to believe that that's what they're made of. But they also don't want to feel like their observations are not being validated. You want your children to trust their instincts. You want them to understand, what am I seeing? What am I saying? What am I seeing and why? What am I hearing and why? Because it'll help them in life.
Yeah, I mean, definitely if they need therapy, take them to therapy. I mean, one of the good things is that a lot of states are starting to allow just one parent to take children to therapy now. I mean, some states still need both parents' permission, but some states you only need one now. So but most of the time, if you file a motion and ask for therapy, a court will grant that, so certainly get a therapist involved for your children if you can.
So in this current moment, I mean, there is so much going on, obviously, in the sort of larger context of culture, and and we all have sort of the macro and the micro of our lives in every way. And I always, thought that your work in this was so interesting because of your lawyer background. And for what you said in our initial conversation was just that you wish that more people who were either public defenders or judges or attorneys or youth advocates or whatever it may be could really understand, in the same way that you might understand substance abuse, that this is something that will dramatically change the conversation and the outcome. Do you see that there is any shift in these systems of an understanding of the intersection of the narcissist and what that is? Do you feel like there's a greater understanding?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's, I literally just launched my high conflict negotiation certification program yesterday. I mean, the interesting thing is that there wasn't such a thing as a lawyer who specialized in narcissism or anything like that until I started talking about it on YouTube during COVID. And then, I have 40 million views on YouTube now, and it was really all of a sudden now I have all these people who message me saying, hey, do you know of such a thing? Or do you know of a mental health specialist who knows about narcissism? Or do you know about this person who knows about narcissism? Well, this kind of thing hasn't really been a thing, So I launched my certification program yesterday because I want people to start getting educated on this and being able to, I want professionals to start being educated on this. I want this training to be, for HR representatives, for police academies, for, all, walks of life. I feel like this is so important, so important.
I love that. I mean, it even goes back to our first question about families. I mean, if you're talking about high conflict negotiation, sometimes that's the Thanksgiving table, right? And like, and having those skills, could have incredible downstream effect, whether it's sort of like the boardroom or the dining room table. How, just tell me real quick before I go to our next question, what the mechanism is to get certified in that, and like how can you be a part of that? Do you go to your website and you learn about it? Do you have to already have a certain degree, or what are the qualifications?
Oh, no, nobody has to have any special qualifications or anything like that. If they email us at support@RebeccaZung.com, then we will send you the information. Actually, if you go to my website, scratch that. If you go to my website at RebeccaZung.com/apply and book a call with someone on our team, we will reach out to you. Just go to RebeccaZung.com/apply and book a call. And if you're interested, we will have a conversation with you about that. Anybody who's already a professional or who wants to coach, become a high conflict negotiation coach and ignite a career in that space is, somebody who we're interested in having a conversation with.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I one of the joys of being a part of this series, like I said, is the very many different lenses that people have on this issue, and the ways in which somehow it's managed to affect and infect lots of different professions and expertise, and how to really drill down on this is an important thing to initially recognize. What I like about the high conflict negotiation idea is, okay, we get it. Now what?
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
what do you do? So this question is sort of a little bit in that vein. Is narcissism something that can be taught or learned? If so, how can I make sure that my children will pick up on narcissistic traits? Jackie R.
Well, I mean, it comes from trauma, so I mean, and I think, again, it's a spectrum, and, I'm not a psychologist or, a psychiatrist. So, I don't want to really venture too far into that world of answering that question, but I mean, I think that as long as you are aware of that and love on them and, make sure that they have the support that they need, preventative is such a hard question,
Yeah, I mean, in a very probably somewhat messy way, can kind of distill from our therapists, our psychologists, some of the insights, at least I've taken away from that, which, is only through my lens. But in terms of narcissism being something that can be taught and learned, I say yes. And I say that from an anecdotal personal place, because I didn't understand for a long time that it was something that I myself was courting, because in some way it was feeding some part of me. And then as soon as I started to really develop language around what this was, I was able to spot it. You see somebody coming towards you and you start to intuitively say, is this a dangerous person? Not a dangerous person. And now, I see one from 1,000 miles away and I'm like, nope, not doing it. So I definitely know from just an anecdotal perspective that it can be taught and it can be learned and it can be recognized. And you can say, in a lot of the discussions we've had is how to spot a narcissist, right? And there's a couple of checklists, a couple of love bombing, sort of like feeding you and then withdrawing, there's a lot of ways to recognize what that is. And there are literally like practical checklists. And then I would say, in terms of the picking up on the narcissistic traits, so what I had experienced when I was listening to all of these experts, especially in the early phases of this series, a couple of them, when they would say something, they would look at the look on my face and they go, you're totally asking yourself right now if you're a narcissist. And I was like, I'm totally asking myself if I'm a narcissist. I would hear something and I'd be like, oh my God, do I do that? Am I a narcissist? What, and they said, the fact that you're asking yourself that question means you're probably not a narcissist.
Exactly. I know. I had the same conversation with my therapist, actually.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, my therapist was like, you're definitely not one.
But in that conversation, and I think one of the things that the series hopes to provide is to be able to create language around all of this. And it's language that you can share with your family. It's language that you can share with your children. It's starting to become literate in these dynamics so that when your child is not under your wing and they're out in the world, they go, oh, that's that thing we talked about. That's that, if they're going, they're going off to college and they have their first, partner, and, they go, oh, that's love bombing. We had this conversation.
Oh, now I definitely see it. Like,
yes. And I think some of that literacy, being able to say, we all have these tendencies, but when do they become sort of an invasion on somebody else's space? That I think is the antidote to a lot of this. Those conversations, even like you said, in the workplace, right? You can have somebody that is the ED of a nonprofit organization, and you're all in it for the mission, and yet nobody feels good. And if
Mhm.
nobody feels good, then that's time to take stock. And
Yeah.
you might just have to be that person in that organization to go, wait a minute. Why does nobody feel safe in this environment? We're all going after this cause, this true north. And you start to question, and maybe you start to create an opportunity for other people to voice their experience and their concern. And that's how the narcissist gets dethroned, which I think is sort of the objective.
Yeah. I mean, trust your gut. How do you feel when you're around the person?
How do you feel? And do you feel that tugging sense of anxiety? Do you feel, that somehow the things that used to make you worthy do not really cut it, and are you, because they're also very good at isolating. They're very good at cutting off the ties to your sources of strength. And if you start to see those arteries being clipped off one by one, narcissists do not do well with people that have like a certain asking for patience. So, if they're impatient, on any level and threatening you, then that's a good indication that that's what you're dealing with.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people that don't have the option to cut themselves off if it's their boss. But they're definitely, I mean, so many people we talked to in the series were just like, there are some hacks. And I know it sounds a little gross, but there are definitely some hacks on how to live your life, how to not make them your centerpiece, because that's all they want. How to take that person and go, okay, this is this person, this is how they function, this is what they're likely to do tonight. It's Christmas Eve, and they're probably going to do something horrible, so I'm going to expect it, and I'm going to cut off the opportunities for them to mess with me. Being able to have a little bit of that knowledge and sort of undermine their access and power.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Very, very good advice.
Well, we are winding down a little bit, I think, I'm hoping that, if anybody else has a question, please send it out to us. But I guess, I wonder now, in terms of, you've had so many different evolutions in your own work and your own career. And, I'm hoping that through this series, and, I hope that people read your book and
Yes. Slaythebully.com. They can go there and pre-order it. And if they pre-order it, they actually get early access to the entire manuscript. Plus they get access to a masterclass, a workbook, all kinds of really cool things.
That's awesome. I am a film director, and I find that in my industry, we are not short of people with these tendencies.
Yeah. Shocking.
I'm sure you have a couple of them in your world. But I do find that, even in my own work, it's really so useful to understand what this is, and understand how to continue to be able to lead your life, knowing that this is something that we all have to negotiate. And, the ideal is that we all have the vocabulary, because the more that the collective really understands this, and the collective is all walks of life, right? There are people up and down the economic spectrum. They're up and down in like every race, every orientation, all of us in some way or another are united often by having dealt with this dynamic. But if we as the collective stop becoming the sort of food source for these people, and if we create a kind of intolerance around their behavior, I think we'll all be a lot better off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the key, by just basically saying, I'm not going to be that for this person. When you are stronger than they are, when you demand respect, when you are higher in frequency and vibrational energy than they just go find a different source of supply.
And that's not you. And that's the thing that gets upsetting to people. It's like, and I've even experienced this, you're like, well, what was I not good enough? And it's no, you were too good. You were,
Yeah.
it's and there is, I think, too much tolerance of these personalities, especially in our business hierarchical situations. We have a lot of the idea of the entrepreneurial spirit, right? The go-getter, all this stuff, and we can feed this in our workplace. And I think, because we even talked to an economist in the series, and talking to you as a lawyer, what's to be understood, it is highly inefficient and costly to keep enabling these personalities in our homes and in our jobs, in our lives. It is highly inefficient. It's not just emotional. It's super practical. These are not people that actually want to finish the job. They don't want to have a life cycle of a project.
No.
They want to keep everybody in a frenzy, which is
Yes.
costly behavior.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. The cold level supply. That's my point.
Yep.
I mean, they want to keep it going.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Rebecca, such a pleasure to talk to you.
Such a pleasure. So
Excited
really
for all of the work that you're doing, and I think it's really exciting, this new certification that you've just launched. That's pretty amazing. The high conflict negotiation, that I'm sure will really help people create a lot of efficiencies in their own life, because we live in a highly high conflict culture right now. Even just to get through, like I said, having a conversation with a relative who might come from the other side of the political aisle,
so
even
much so.
those skills just to be able to help understand each other, I think is really for the greater good. So thank you.
Thank you.
Zach, do you need anything else from us?
No, we're all good. That was amazing. Thank you guys so much for getting on. And we hope that everyone enjoyed and was able to get their questions answered. This will be recorded and we'll hopefully have the opportunity to watch it again soon for any of those who missed it. So thank you, Amy, and thank you, Rebecca. I hope you guys have